You think your rights matter in here. You have no rights, remember that. The guard's whisper was a venomous promise, his knuckles white around the nightstick. Inmates learned quickly not to look Samuel in the eye. For 3 days they targeted him, shoves in the hallway, spoiled meals, solitary confinement for a perceived attitude. They had no idea every shoved meal, every threatened nightstick was being meticulously documented. The man they were breaking was not an inmate. He was a federal investigator, and their brutality was becoming Exhibit A. This was the Blackwell County Correctional Facility, a place where complaints of brutality vanished into empty internal reviews. To crack it, the Department of Justice needed something undeniable, an eyewitness from the inside. So they planted Samuel, a seasoned investigator, under a fabricated identity. His mission was simple: endure the system to expose its darkest ritual, the deliberate breaking of black men. But to document the truth, he first had to survive it. Samuel's new identity was watertight. A 34-year-old man from the city, sentenced on a minor fabricated parole violation. His file painted him as quiet, unconnected, the perfect target. The intake process was a dehumanizing ritual. Mugshots, fingerprints, the cold pinch of the metal bracelet. He maintained the slumped posture of defeat, but behind his eyes, a forensic observer was already at work. He noted the security camera blind spots in the booking area. He memorized the faces of the guards who handled paperwork with board cruelty versus those who avoided eye contact. Every detail was data. The Blackwell County Correctional Facility operated on a simple, unwritten code: control through terror. And no one embodied that code more than Sergeant Gareth Maddox, a 17-year veteran with a reputation that echoed in the concrete halls. His nickname among inmates was the Reaper, not for any single act, but for the slow, methodical pressure he applied, the kind that broke wills and left no visible marks. Samuel's briefing had highlighted Maddox. Multiple complaints had been filed against him over the years, each dismissed after internal review. The complaints all shared a common thread. They came from black inmates alleging excessive force after minor infractions. Samuel's first 48 hours were a masterclass in psychological warfare. He was assigned to a cramped 6-man cell. His bunkmates were wary, broken men. One, an older inmate named Ray, whispered a warning on the first night. "You got a target on your back. New, quiet, they see that as weak. They gonna test you." The test came the next morning during the shower line. A hulking guard named Officer Briggs shoved Samuel hard against the wet tile wall. "Move faster, pretty boy." The impact was calculated, meant to provoke a reaction. Samuel let his head thud against the tile, playing the part, muttering a subdued curse. It was logged as Incident 1. The mission's operational parameters were precise. Samuel carried no wire, no hidden camera. The technology was too risky. Instead, his mind was the recording device. Every interaction, every threat, every instance of unwarranted force had to be memorized with courtroom precision. Time, location, the exact words spoken, the nature of the assault. Each night, locked in the solitary darkness of his bunk, he would mentally replay the day's events, solidifying the testimony. His only physical tool was a standard-issue prison pen. On the margins of his legal paperwork, in a code only he understood, he would note key initials and times. A memory trigger for the full account he would dictate the moment he was extracted. But the plan had a critical vulnerability. To get the evidence that would stand up in federal court, Samuel couldn't just observe general hostility. He needed to document a pattern of deliberate, racially motivated abuse severe enough to constitute a civil rights violation. He had to make himself a magnet for it. And that meant challenging the one thing Maddox demanded: absolute submission. The opportunity arose in the mess hall 3 days in. An inmate named Daryl, a young black man, dropped his plastic tray. The sound was like a gunshot in the cavernous room. Sergeant Maddox, who had been leaning against a pillar, slowly pushed himself upright. He didn't yell. He just walked over, his boots echoing. He stared at Daryl, then at the spilled food on the floor. "Clean it," Maddox said, his voice flat. Daryl, trembling, began using his hands to scoop the slop. Not like that, Maddox said. He placed his boot on the back of Daryl's neck, forcing the young man's face toward the mess. Lick it up. A few guards laughed. Others looked away. Samuel watched, his blood cold, memorizing every detail. Maddox's stance, the time, 11:17 a.m., the faces of the laughing guards. That evening, Samuel made his first calculated move. During the headcount in his cell block, Maddox paused in front of his cell. "Everything satisfactory, gentlemen?" he asked, his tone dripping with false courtesy. The other inmates mumbled, "Yes, sir." Samuel remained silent, meeting Maddox's gaze for a half-second too long. It wasn't defiance, but it wasn't submission. It was assessment. Maddox's eyes narrowed. He said nothing, moving on. The hook was set. The pressure intensified subtly. Samuel's work detail was changed to the hottest, most punishing job, kitchen waste disposal. His requests for library time were lost. Then the first direct strike. He was written up for insubordinate posture during a pat-down. The report, which Samuel would later read, stated he had stiffened his body in a threatening manner. The consequence was 24 hours in segregation. The whole. Segregation was where the facility's true face revealed itself. A concrete coffin devoid of natural light, the only sound a distant, constant drip. The guards here operated with impunity. On his second hour in the cell, a tray of food was slid through the slot. It was a brown, congealed slop, cold and inedible. Samuel left it. An hour later, a different guard opened the slot. Not hungry, that's a violation, refusing sustenance. The guard, whose nameplate read Vogel, entered the cell with two others. They didn't beat him. They performed a compliance check. Samuel was forced against the wall, his limbs manipulated into painful, stress positions for over 30 minutes. Vogel whispered the whole time, "This is for your own good. Gotta learn. No one's coming for you. You understand? No one." He understood perfectly. He was counting each second, nodding the technique, the jargon they used to justify the torture. This was the pattern. This was the evidence. Upon release from segregation, Samuel was marked. He was now on Maddox's personal radar. The sergeant began appearing at unexpected times, a silent observer. The other inmates gave Samuel a wider berth, sensing the gathering storm. Ray, his bunkmate, pulled him aside in the laundry room. "You poking the bear, son. Maddox, he don't forget. He's gonna put you in a situation, a no-win. And when you lose, he owns you." The situation arrived 1 week later, a routine shakedown of the cell block. Maddox oversaw it personally. Guards tore apart bunks, scattering meager possessions. When they reached Samuel's bunk, they found a contraband item, a sharpened piece of plastic from a discarded food container. It was a plant, obvious and clumsy. Maddox held it up between two fingers. "Possession of a weapon, that's a major infraction." He turned to Samuel. "You know what this means? Administrative segregation. Indefinite, maybe a transfer to a maximum security unit." He let the threat hang. Then he offered the out, the classic trap. "But maybe it just fell near your bunk. Maybe you were just too slow to report it. Your attitude determines your altitude in here." Every instinct as a lawman screamed at Samuel to call out the frame-up, but the investigator in him knew that was the play. They wanted him to argue, to give them a legal pretext for a violent response. So he did nothing. He stood perfectly still, his face a mask of calm observation. He said the one thing they never expected, "I have nothing to say." Maddox's cool demeanor cracked for a fraction of a second. This wasn't fear, this wasn't anger. It was calm, and it was more dangerous than both. "Nothing to say," Maddox repeated softly. He stepped so close Samuel could smell the coffee on his breath. "We'll find your voice." He turned to the guards. "Cell 14 is free. Put him in with Henderson." A visible chill went through the other guards. Even Briggs looked uneasy. Inmate Henderson was a legend of the worst kind, a violent, unstable man known for attacking cellmates over perceived slights. Sending someone to Henderson wasn't punishment. It was a death sentence by proxy. It was the perfect crime. An inmate-on-inmate homicide. Tragic, but not the guard's fault. As two guards grabbed his arms, Samuel's mind raced. This was the point of no return. To survive Henderson, he might have to fight to break cover. To not fight was to be killed or maimed. His mission and his life were now balanced on a razor's edge. The heavy steel door of cell 14 loomed ahead, and from within he could hear the low, steady sound of someone breathing. The cell door slammed shut, sealing Samuel in darkness with the predator. He braced for the attack, his muscles coiled. But the attack never came. Instead, a low, rasping voice cut through the gloom. "Relax, Federal, I'm not gonna touch you. We're on the same side." Samuel's mind, trained for deception, screamed trap. This was another layer of Maddox's game. He remained silent, his back against the cold wall, eyes straining to see the man hunched on the lower bunk. The figure shifted. "Name's Marcus. Marcus Henderson. My sheet says aggravated assault. My real job is confidential informant for the FBI's Public Corruption Unit. I've been in here for 8 months, building a case on Maddox's drug smuggling ring." The words landed with the weight of truth. The FBI, a parallel investigation Samuel's DOJ handlers had never mentioned, operational compartmentalization, or a fatal oversight. "Why tell me?" Samuel finally asked, his voice barely audible. "Because Maddox just served you to me on a platter," Marcus whispered urgently. "He thinks I'll kill you. That's his move. He uses me to clean his problems. When I don't, he'll know something's wrong. Our covers are both blown the second dawn rolls around." The entire mission pivoted in that concrete cube. Samuel was no longer a lone observer. He was now a node in a dangerous, uncoordinated network. Marcus had evidence, names, drop points, financial ledgers he'd memorized. But it was all about graft, contraband, profit. Samuel's evidence was about brutality, civil rights, a different kind of crime. Together, they painted a complete picture of a facility rotten to its core. They had until the morning headcount to devise a strategy. The first step was to stage a convincing conflict. They agreed on a story, a brief, violent scuffle where Samuel, fighting for his life, managed to subdue the fearsome Henderson. It would explain noise, maybe even a minor injury, and would grant Samuel a dangerous reputation, one that might give Maddox pause. As they whispered plans, Marcus revealed the extent of the corruption. It's not just Maddox, it's the shift lieutenant, the head of security. They get a cut of every phone card, every gram of spice that comes through. The brutality, that's the maintenance cost. You keep the population terrified, they don't snitch on the cash flow. Just before the guards' next round, they created the scene. Marcus slammed his own fist into the metal bed frame, howling in feigned rage. Samuel grunted and shoved a locker, the crash echoing down the block. When the guard peered through the slot, they were on opposite sides of the cell, breathing heavily, Samuel with a fresh, self-inflicted scrape on his cheek. The guard smirked and moved on. The first act had sold. The next day, Maddox himself came to the cell. He looked between them, his eyes cold and analytical. He saw the scrape, the dishevelment, but he also saw that both men were alive and functional. His plan had failed. "Henderson, lost your touch," Maddox said, his voice dangerously soft. "Man fights dirty," Marcus grumbled, playing his part. Maddox's gaze settled on Samuel. The calm in Samuel's eyes, the lack of fear, it was an anomaly his instincts couldn't ignore. "You're tougher than you look. We'll see how tough." He ordered Samuel moved back to his old cell. The Henderson gambit had failed, but it had elevated Samuel from a target to a priority. Back in general population, the atmosphere had shifted. The story of him beating Henderson spread in hushed tones. Inmates looked at him with a mix of awe and suspicion. Ray, his old bunkmate, just shook his head. "You just made it worse. Now he has to break you, publicly." The breaking point came in the prison yard 2 days later. A staged fight erupted between two inmates near the perimeter fence. As guards rushed to intervene, Maddox isolated Samuel near the weight bench. "I don't know who you are," Maddox said, his back to the security camera, "but you're not one of them. The way you watch, the way you remember." He leaned in. "You're a rat or you're a cop. Either way, your time here is done." Samuel said nothing. Any denial would be confirmation. "I'm going to give you one chance," Maddox continued, his voice a venomous whisper. You tell me who sent you and what they want, and you walk out of here into protective custody. You stay silent, and I will have you transferred to the state pen by the end of the week. You know what happens to a suspected cop in the state pen. They last about as long as a snowball in hell. It was the ultimate threat. Removal from the investigation, death in another facility. The mission would be a total loss. Samuel's mind raced. He had to accelerate the timeline. He needed to get his memorized evidence out now. His only lifeline was Marcus. Their communication was perilous, relying on brief, coded exchanges in the laundry line. Samuel passed the critical message. Harvest tomorrow. Need the package. It meant he was ready to transmit his full testimony and needed Marcus's smuggling route to get it to the outside. But Maddox was moving faster. That evening, Samuel was summoned to the administration wing. Not to an office, but to a stark interrogation room. Waiting for him was Maddox, but a man in a cheap suit, Internal Affairs Captain Royce. The man offered a thin smile. Have a seat, mister. Whatever your name is. We have a problem. Sergeant Maddox believes you are a security threat. He's filed paperwork recommending your immediate transfer for the safety of the institution. This was the bureaucratic kill switch. Captain Royce slid a document across the table. It was a transfer order, signed and awaiting only the warden's final approval in the morning. Of course, Royce said, these things can sometimes be reconsidered if we had a compelling reason to keep you here, like if you were working for us. He leaned back. My unit has had suspicions about Maddox for some time, but we lack concrete evidence. Help us and we help you. Wear a wire. Get him to talk. Samuel's training screamed. This was the oldest trick in the book. IA wasn't offering a deal. They were fishing to discover his true affiliation. If he was DOJ, they'd bury the transfer order and cover up Maddox's crimes to protect the department. If he was just an inmate, they'd throw him to the wolves. Agreeing to either offer was a trap. I have nothing to say to Internal Affairs, Samuel stated, repeating his only safe phrase. Royce's smile vanished. Then you've made your choice. The transfer was now inevitable. Samuel had maybe 18 hours before he was shipped out to his death. Returning to his cell block, Samuel felt the walls closing in. The mission was on the brink of catastrophic failure. All the abuse he'd endured, all the evidence he'd cataloged in his mind, would die with him in a distant prison yard. He had one shot: get the full testimony to Marcus tonight. The problem was the nightly lockdown. No movement between cells. His evidence was in his head. He needed to transcribe it. He scavenged his cell, a standard-issue Bible, his prison pen, a few sheets of commissary notepaper. The notes had to be coded, concise, and hidden in plain sight. He worked through the night, listening for the guard's footsteps. In the margins of the Book of Psalms, next to specific verses, he wrote sequences of numbers and initials. Psalm 56, verse 8, You have kept count of my tossings. Next to it he wrote, M. Briggs SH 31117 Bot. Code for Maddox and Briggs, Segregation Hall, Cell 3, Time and Bouton Throat. The incident with Darryl. He filled the pages with dozens of such entries, a cryptic but decipherable ledger of crimes. The physical act of writing was a risk. If he was caught with notes, it was over. But it was the only way. As dawn's gray light filtered through the narrow window, he had completed the record. Now he had to pass the Bible to Marcus during the chaotic morning shower rotation. The morning routine was tense. Samuel tucked the Bible under his arm. In the steamy, crowded shower room, he spotted Marcus. Their eyes met. The handoff had to be instant, unseen. As Samuel turned a corner, he let the book slip from his grip. Marcus, right behind him, caught it smoothly against his leg and kept moving. The evidence was now in the hands of an FBI informant whose own life was in jeopardy. Samuel felt a moment of grim relief. It was immediately shattered by the sound of a whistle. Officer Briggs pointed directly at him. You, Boone, Warden's office, now. It was too early for a transfer. This was something else. He was marched not to admin but back to the segregation unit, to the same concrete coffin. Captain Royce was waiting, his face stone. "Change of plans," he said. "The warden signed off on solitary confinement pending transfer. For your own protection, of course." He gestured to the cell. "Seems someone intercepted a note suggesting you were planning to assault a guard. We can't have that." It was a complete lockdown. No yard time. No showers with the population. No contact with Marcus. Samuel was sealed away just as his evidence began its perilous journey out. He had no way of knowing if Marcus could activate his extraction protocol or if the Bible would be found during a cell shakedown. For 48 hours, Samuel sat in the silent dark, his fate entirely in the hands of a man he'd known for less than a week. The only thing that penetrated the door was the occasional taunt from a guard during meal delivery. "State pen's gonna eat you alive, cop." Then on the third morning, a different guard opened the slot, not with a tray but with a terse command. "On your feet. You're leaving." Samuel's heart sank. This was the transfer. But they didn't take him to booking to process out. They took him upstairs to the warden's personal conference room. As the door opened, Samuel expected to see Royce or Maddox. Instead, he saw two men in dark suits and a woman holding a DOJ credentials wallet open. The woman spoke first. "Investigator, your ride is here. It's time to come home." The relief of extraction lasted precisely as long as the car ride to the federal field office. There, Samuel's handler, Special Agent Ingram, delivered the first gut punch. "Marcus Henderson is dead, found in his cell this morning. Official cause, suicide." Samuel felt the floor drop out. The Bible, the evidence, their only insider witness gone. "It wasn't suicide," Samuel said, his voice flat. "Of course it wasn't," Ingram replied, her face grim. "But the prison's medical examiner has already signed off. The facility is locked down, claiming it's under investigation. Our problem is the evidence chain. Your memorized testimony is critical, but it's hearsay without corroboration. Henderson's death means his FBI testimony about the smuggling ring is also gone. They're cleaning house." For the next 72 hours, Samuel lived in a secure hotel room, debriefing with a team of attorneys and agents from the DOJ Civil Rights Division. He recited everything, transforming the coded notes from the Bible into a devastating chronological ledger. The attorney leading the case, David Chen, listened with growing anger. "This is textbook pattern and practice. The targeting, the coded language, the use of solitary as punishment for attitude. It's a blueprint for a civil rights lawsuit." But a blueprint wasn't enough. They needed physical evidence or a cooperating witness from inside the fortress. The prison administration, now alerted by the sudden federal interest, had gone into total lockdown. All staff were ordered not to speak to investigators. Internal Affairs Captain Royce, the man who'd offered Samuel the fake deal, was now leading the independent inquiry into Henderson's death. Then the first break came from an unexpected source. Samuel's old bunkmate, Ray. A week after Samuel's extraction, Chen's office received an anonymous letter, postmarked from a nearby town. It contained a single, blurry photocopy of an incident report from the prison's infirmary. It was for Darryl, the young man Maddox had forced to lick food off the floor. The report, dated the same day, listed his injuries as minor abrasions from a fall. But in the margin, in different handwriting, was a note. "Per SGT, M log as fall, PT, reports neck trauma from boot." The signature was a scribble, but the employee number was clear. L. Vogel, Officer Vogel from segregation. Vogel had kept a secret ledger. He was covering his tracks. This was a crack in the wall. The DOJ team tracked him down. Vogel had quit the correctional force just days after Henderson's death. When two agents approached him at his new job as a mall security guard, he folded almost immediately. "I didn't sign up for that," he whispered in the back of their sedan, his hands shaking. "The brutality stuff, okay, that was the culture. But Henderson, they killed him. And they expected me to help cover it up. I took pictures of the body, of the fake suicide note they planted." Vogel's phone contained the crime scene photos. They showed Henderson, but they also showed something else. In the background of one shot on a desk in the guard station was an open logbook. When the image was enhanced, the logbook showed entries of use of force incidents that had never been reported to the state. It was the facility's secret record, and Vogel gave them the location, a locked filing cabinet in Sergeant Maddox's private office. The DOJ now had enough for a search warrant, not just for the files, but for the prison's entire personnel and use of force database. The raid was scheduled for dawn the next day. But the prison had moles too. An hour before the federal team was set to move, David Chen got an emergency call from a clerk at the county courthouse. A local judge, friendly with the prison's union, had just signed an order blocking the warrant, citing overbroad federal overreach into state corrections matters. The system was protecting its own. Samuel watched as seasoned attorneys slammed phones down in frustration. The legal roadblock was a masterstroke. It would take months to fight through the courts, months during which evidence would disappear and witnesses would be intimidated. The mission was failing in a conference room instead of a cell block. That's when Samuel made a suggestion. We don't need the whole database. We just need that one cabinet in Maddox's office, and we don't need a warrant to get someone to look inside it. He was thinking of the only person left inside who might help, Officer Lewis Briggs, the guard who had shoved him on his first day. Briggs was a bully, but not a killer. During Samuel's time inside, he'd noticed Briggs's discomfort during the worst abuses. He was a follower, not a leader. And followers are vulnerable when the leader's protection vanishes. Using Vogel's information about guard schedules and locker combinations, the team devised a risk. They couldn't contact Briggs directly. Instead, they sent him a message. A plain envelope was placed in his personal locker. Inside was a single photo, a still from the prison yard security camera showing Maddox isolating Samuel. On the back, a typed message. "You are in this picture. The FBI has it. Your cooperation is the difference between witness and defendant." The filing cabinet in Maddox's office, the blue ledger, tonight. It was a bluff with deadly stakes. If Briggs went to Maddox, the evidence would be destroyed forever. If he panicked and did nothing, they were back to square one. They watched Briggs's suburban house from an unmarked van. At 10 p.m. he left, driving not to the prison but to a deserted parking lot. He sat in his car for 20 minutes. Then he drove to the prison staff entrance. This was it. Through Vogel, they knew the night shift routines. Briggs had access to Maddox's office for routine security sweeps. At 2:17 a.m., a text arrived on a burner phone held by Agent Ingram. It was from an unknown number. Just one image, a blurry photo of an open filing cabinet drawer. Inside were neat rows of blue binders. Briggs had taken the bait. 10 minutes later, a second text, a photo of a single page from a ledger. The entries were chilling, coded initials of inmates, dates, and brief descriptions like cell extraction resistance or segregation noncompliance. Next to each, a name: Maddox, Briggs, Vogel, others. It was a trophy log of violence. But as Chen scanned the image, his blood ran cold. "This isn't just a use of force log," he said, zooming in. "Look at these columns. These are financial codes, invoice numbers. This isn't just about brutality. They were billing the state for overtime on these extractions. They were getting paid for the torture." The case had just exploded. It was no longer just civil rights abuse. It was wire fraud, conspiracy to defraud the government, federal crimes with mandatory minimum sentences. Suddenly, Maddox and his crew weren't just looking at lawsuits. They were looking at decades in federal prison themselves. The blue ledger was the key, but it was still inside the prison. Briggs's final text read, "Can't remove. Cameras everywhere on exit. Maddox has remote access to safe. If it's moved, he knows." They had the proof, but they couldn't get the proof out. And at 7 a.m., Maddox would arrive for his shift, open his cabinet, and the ledger would vanish. They had a 4-hour window and an evidence locker they couldn't touch. Agent Ingram looked at Samuel, then at Chen. "There's only one way. We go in now. not with a warrant for the ledger, but on exigent circumstances to prevent the destruction of evidence in a homicide. Henderson's death. We use Vogel's photo of the body as probable cause. It's thin, and the county will scream, but we might just get a friendly federal judge to bite at 5 in the morning. It was all or nothing. A tactical raid on a state correctional facility. The potential for a violent standoff was enormous, but the clock was ticking down to 7. Chen picked up the phone to wake a federal judge. The next move would either bring the entire corrupt edifice crashing down or trigger a constitutional crisis that would bury the evidence forever. The mission had escaped the prison walls, only to confront the even more formidable fortress of the system itself. At 5:27 in the morning, a federal judge, roused from sleep, listened to David Chen's frantic summary. He granted the exigent circumstances warrant, but with a caveat. You have 1 hour. If you don't have that ledger in hand by 6:30, I'll be the one signing the order for your arrests for unlawful entry. The raid was a tactical ballet under pressure. A convoy of black SUVs, accompanied by 2 federal marshals' units, descended on the Blackwell County Correctional Facility just as the night shift was winding down. They didn't go through the main gate. Using Vogel's schematics, they entered via a little-used service road, bypassing the front checkpoints. Their target was the administrative wing. Inside, Officer Lewis Briggs, pale and sweating, waited at a side door he'd propped open with a wad of paper. He led the team, Samuel, Chen, and 4 armed federal agents, through sterile, empty hallways toward Maddox's office. Every second ticked against them. The day shift guards would begin arriving at 6. Maddox's office door was a solid slab of oak with a digital lock. Briggs fumbled with a keycard. It didn't work. Maddox had changed the codes. He knows, Briggs whispered, panic rising. He must know. Samuel stepped forward. He remembered a detail from his observation, Maddox's birthday, which the sergeant had once boastfully mentioned during an inmate's processing. He tried a 4-digit combination based on the date. The lock beeped red. Time was bleeding away. Then from down the hall came the sound of footsteps. 2 night shift guards making their final rounds turned the corner. The scene froze. For a moment it was just federal agents and state corrections officers staring each other down in the fluorescent glow. One guard went for his radio. "Stop! Federal warrant," Agent Ingram announced, stepping forward with the document. The guard hesitated, his eyes darting to Briggs's terrified face. That hesitation was all they needed. The agents secured both men without a shot fired. But the clock was now at 5:52. Chen turned to the door. "Forget the code." One of the marshals produced a compact hydraulic ram. 2 blows and the door splintered inward. The office was obsessively neat. The filing cabinet stood against the far wall. Samuel went straight to it. The blue ledger was exactly where Briggs's photo had shown it. But as Samuel pulled it out, something else came with it, a smaller black notebook tucked behind the row of binders. He opened it. It was Maddox's personal journal. On the first page was a list of names, not of inmates, but of county officials, judges, and even a state senator. Next to each name were dollar amounts and dates. It was a payoff ledger. The corruption didn't stop at the prison walls. It bought protection from the outside. They had everything. At 6:04, the team exited the building, ledger and black book in an evidence bag. They passed the arriving day shift guards in the parking lot, whose confusion turned to shock as federal vehicles sped past them, sirens off. The fallout was immediate and seismic. By 9 a.m., Sergeant Gareth Maddox was arrested at his home, still in his uniform shirt, reading the morning paper. Officers Briggs and Vogel were taken into protective custody, having agreed to cooperate fully. Captain Royce of Internal Affairs was arrested 2 hours later, caught trying to wipe the prison's central server. The blue ledger was a bombshell. It detailed over 200 separate incidents of excessive force, each logged with chilling brevity, and cross-referenced with falsified overtime slips that had billed the state over $400,000 for the torture of inmates. The Black Book triggered a separate, wider corruption probe that would eventually topple 3 county officials. But the true victory was for the victims. With the physical evidence now available, the DOJ filed a massive civil rights lawsuit, United States v. Blackwell County Department of Corrections. The lawsuit sought not just damages, but sweeping, court-enforced reforms, the installation of comprehensive camera coverage, the abolition of prolonged solitary confinement, an independent inmate grievance auditor, and mandatory racial bias training for all staff. The criminal trials proceeded quickly. Facing the mountain of evidence and the testimony of Samuel, Vogel, and Briggs, Maddox's defense crumbled. He was convicted on 47 counts, including civil rights violations, wire fraud, and conspiracy to commit murder in the death of Marcus Henderson. He was sentenced to life in a federal penitentiary, a place where his reputation as a former guard would make him a target. The irony was not lost on anyone. Several other guards received sentences ranging from 10 to 25 years. The day the verdict was read, Samuel visited Darrell, the young man from the mess hall. Paroled early due to the notoriety of the case, Darrell was trying to rebuild his life. He shook Samuel's hand, tears in his eyes. "You came back," he said. "No one ever comes back." Samuel also tracked down Ray, his old bunkmate, who had been transferred to a different facility. Ray had written a statement that helped the investigation. He was now up for parole, his record noted for his cooperation. But the most surprising detail emerged during the discovery process for the civil suit. While auditing the prison's financials, a forensic accountant found a line item for psychological services that seemed inflated. Digging deeper, she uncovered that the prison's contracted psychiatrist, Dr. Aris Thorne, had been signing off on the extended solitary confinement orders as medically necessary for a fee. He had diagnosed over 100 inmates with conduct disorders to justify their torture. Dr. Thorne was stripped of his license and charged with fraud and malpractice. The revelation exposed how the entire system, security, administration, and even healthcare, had been weaponized. 1 year after Samuel first walked into Blackwell, the facility was under a federal consent decree. The new warden was a reformer from another state. The cell where Samuel had been tortured was now a staff training room, its walls marked with plaques detailing the constitutional rights of the incarcerated. Samuel returned to the DOJ, but not to undercover work. He now led a training division, teaching new investigators how to document systemic abuse. His calm, observant eyes, once a liability in a cell block, were now his greatest asset in a classroom. The story ends not with a dramatic raid, but with a quiet procedural change. Because of the lawsuit, the state legislature passed Henderson's Law, requiring all correctional facilities in the state to have independent, unannounced audits of their use of force logs. Marcus Henderson's name and Samuel's sacrifice were now woven into the legal fabric meant to prevent such horrors from happening again. The system had tried to convince Samuel that no one was coming for him. In the end, he had come for the system, and he had brought the full weight of justice with him. The story of Blackwell County is not an anomaly. It is a case study, a blueprint of how cruelty becomes policy when oversight fails and silence is enforced. For every Samuel, there are thousands of incarcerated men and women with no federal badge, whose testimonies are dismissed, whose bruises are logged as falls, whose cries are muffled by concrete and indifference. The reforms at Blackwell, hard-won as they were, represent only a single facility in a vast national system. The DOJ's own investigations list dozens of other prisons and jails under similar scrutiny for civil rights violations. The question the story leaves us with is not whether there are more Gareth Maddoxes out there, but what allows them to thrive. It is the closed ecosystem, the us versus them culture, the financial incentives, and the powerful political shields. Samuel's mission proved that sunlight is the only true disinfectant, but generating that sunlight requires unimaginable courage. It required a man to endure dehumanization, to memorize his own abuse, and to maintain his clarity while surrounded by violence. It required a guard like Vogel to finally question his complicity. It required a man like Marcus Henderson to give his life. The legacy is measured in small, concrete changes. Cameras where there were blind spots, auditors where there were enforcers, a ledger of abuse becoming a ledger of conviction. It is measured in the fact that Daryl can now sleep without fearing a boot on his neck, that Ray has a chance at a life after prison, and that the next young black man entering that system might face a rule book, not a reign of terror. Yet the work is never finished. Systems resist change. New abuses find new shadows. Vigilance, the story tells us, is not a one-time raid. It is a permanent commitment. It requires reporters who dig, lawyers who fight, whistleblowers who speak, and ordinary citizens who refuse to look away and say, "That's just how it is." Samuel's calm, observant eyes in that original thumbnail were not the eyes of a victim, but of a witness. And in the end, the witness proved more powerful than the men with the nightsticks. He reminds us that the greatest weapon against corruption is not more force, but more truth. Truth documented, truth preserved, and truth spoken to power. If you found this story of courage and consequence compelling, show your support by liking this video. It helps bring these important narratives to light. Subscribe and hit the notification bell because next week, we're investigating another hidden world where justice hangs in the balance. Thank you for watching.